Hey there friends, I'm Paisley and Glue. Welcome to my channel, and today I thought I would show you some of the essential tools that I use in the shop and are going to be really useful for you if you're looking to get started sewing. So, first of all, we have your cutting implements. So generally you're going to want some sort of fabric cutting scissors. These are much sharper than your normal everyday scissors, and they're going to make your life a lot easier when you're going to cut your fabric. So if we have a tiny little scrap here, slices right through. Whereas something that is not as sharp is going to catch the fabric and generally make your life really difficult. So invest in a good pair. They can get pretty pricey. I like these ones because they've got this spring-loaded handle that sort of pops it open again. It's a lot easier on my hands and wrists if I'm cutting a lot of fabric. Wait for them to go on sale or look for those 40 or 50% off coupons at the fabric store, and those are going to be when you want to buy higher priced items like this. Along with the larger pair, you're probably going to want a smaller pair of scissors. These don't have to be super duper sharp. I like these because they have this sort of kind of razor tip, and you can get really close if you're trying to clip little pieces. These are by Fiskars. It's not critical that these are fabric cutting. They're mostly going to be used for snipping tiny pieces of thread, which is why you want something that's small as opposed to a larger pair like this. The next thing that's critical is some measuring tools. So you're probably going to want to get a measuring tape like this. These are generally 60 inches long, and they're just sort of easy for taking measurements of yourself, measuring larger pieces of fabrics. But more importantly, and something I use all the time, are these quilting rulers. And these come in different widths. I like this one because it's 2 inches. It's sort of a good standard size. I can kind of eyeball what I think 2 inches is and then use this to get a really precise marking. And there's also lines here that you can see through that every 1/8 of an inch there's a little notch. So that's helpful when you're measuring out seam allowances, when you're checking hems, things like that. And these are 18 inches long, which is half a yard. So it's a good sort of halfway point when you're measuring larger pieces. The next thing you're gonna want is some pins. You're definitely gonna want straight pins. I like ones like this. There's a couple different lengths here. I've got some ball-headed ones that are both not as long and long. I like longer ones generally. I like ones with these colored heads on them. They're a little bit easier to see in the fabric so you don't miss any. Nobody wants to put on a shirt after you've made it with a bunch of pins still in it. And I also tend to drop them on the floor all the time, and so you're less likely to step on them that way. I also use safety pins a lot. I've got 2 different sizes here. I've got 1.5 inch and 2 inch. Both are useful sizes. I actually use these to fit garments, both on myself and others with, because if you are safety pins, then you're not going to stick yourself, and they also won't fall out if you maybe wait a couple days before making those alterations. If you've used straight pins, chances are you're going to lose a couple on the way, and also maybe poke some people. Next up, you're going to want some thread, and your thread stash will grow as you start to work on more projects. Generally, you're going to want to buy a thread color that's as close to your fabric color as possible. If you can't find a very close match, usually it's better to go a shade or 2 darker than the fabric than a shade or 2 lighter. I found that darker thread on a fabric that's a little lighter shows up less than a lighter thread on a fabric that's a little darker. Yeah. The other thing you are going to want to have around is some hand sewing needles, and there's lots of different kinds. Generally, you're just going to want sort of a standard, come in pack, like assorted packs. That's great to get started. And usually some sort of little pin cushion. These you can buy at the store. You can also make your own. It could be your first project. Who knows? And there's always going to be a little bit of finishing, either a hem, sewing on a snap, or a hook and a bar, some sort of something that you're going to need some hand sewing needles for. And along those lines, thread wax is also a great thing to have. It helps you run the thread through the wax like this, and it sort of gives the thread a nice coat of wax, makes it much easier to pull through the fabric and much less likely to knot up on itself, which is a very irritating thing to have happen. And then the last on my essential tool list is a seam ripper. And I'm sorry to tell you that mistakes happen to everybody constantly. You will be using the seam ripper a lot. Sometimes you mean to, sometimes you don't mean to. They're a useful thing to have. There's lots of different kinds. This is by Clover. There's smaller ones, there's larger ones, but you're definitely going to want to keep this close by. And then for the slightly less essential tools, I have a couple different things to show you. First is a pair of pinking shears, and these are handy if you don't have a serger, but you want to try to get your project seams to last a little bit longer. So if you don't do anything to your seams, the edges are going to fray and you're going to kind of end up with something that's a little bit of a mess on the inside. But if you use the pinking shears, it sort of cuts this wavy edge into the fabric, and that is going to keep the seams a little neater looking for longer, even if you need to wash the garment. Another thing that I've just started using more of is a rotary cutter. And I like this one. It's nice and large. It's got this sort of safety handle here when you're using it. It's great when you're cutting out very large pieces of fabric. It can really help the hand fatigue issue. It's also super great if you're a quilter. I think all quilters basically use these. The only thing is they're similar in price to a pair of sewing shears, so there's still that cost issue, and you're also going to need to buy a self-healing cutting mat, and those can be a little bit more on the pricey side. So it's going to be at least as much as a good pair of sewing scissors, if not a little bit more. But this is another great choice. I use these a lot when I'm cutting leather or vinyl. They're really great for those. The other thing you're going to want is some sort of marking tool. I generally use pencils if I've got light colored fabric and the pencil's going to show up. I know it won't disappear on me. It's easy. I've always got one nearby. I've got a pencil nearby. And there are some that are made for fabric, so we can go over those. There's some disappearing pens, and those are great. I tend not to use them. They dry out really fast. The caps break. I just end up buying a million of them and then losing them. I do like these Taylor's chalk pencils. These are great. These come in multiple colors. I like the white ones for dark fabrics especially. And then this is actually Taylor's chalk, and this comes in both waxed and unwaxed form. And I like these. I don't always like that I can't get a very fine edge to them without kind of sanding them down. But they're great if you're sort of marking out large sections quickly. These are friction pens, which are not necessarily made for fabric, but the fun thing about them is that they're erasable, and they also disappear with heat. So if you use this as the purple one, so it would show up on a light colored fabric, and it's sort of a fine tip point marker thing. You mark this, and then if you hit it with an iron, it will make the line disappear. Sometimes it will leave a very faint shadow of a line behind. If it's in a seam, you're not going to notice it. But to be aware, you always want to do tests on things before you use marking tools if they're going to be visible later. The other thing that you probably have around your house already is some sort of pushing or poking tool like this. This is just a chopstick, and these are great for turning corners, say on a collar where you have sort of a sharp turn that you need to make here after you've stitched both edges together. These are great for poking the corner out but not poking through the corner, which is always the trick. The other thing you're probably going to want is some fray block or fray check, and this is a good thing to have nearby if you accidentally clip too far when you're clipping a seam or clipping a thread. If you accidentally catch something, you can put this on the hole and it will keep it from getting any bigger. The other two things, which actually should be in the first part that's essential, is an iron. And an iron is critical to sewing, I'm sorry to tell you. It doesn't have to be a very nice iron. It just needs to get hot and preferably have a steam option. And while you're at it, make sure that you're using distilled water in that iron It's really cheap. You can buy it 70 cents at the grocery store, but it's going to extend the life of the iron. Tap water has a lot of minerals generally in it, and that kind of builds up on the inside of the iron and is going to shorten its life drastically. And then the last thing that's really handy is a tailor's ham, which is what this is. It's sort of a very densely stuffed little pillow. And this is super helpful when you are at the ironing table or ironing board and you're pressing a curved seam. You can sort of lay it over the curve of the ham. You can stand them up and press sort of a small rounded section. These are really versatile. They seem like a little funny, but once you start really getting in there with your garment making, you're going to realize that they really are super helpful. So that's the end of my essential tool demonstration. These are the things that I really think are critical. There's probably a few that I forgot. If you have any things that you really can't live without when you're sewing, drop me a comment in the comment section below us and let me know what it is and give me a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks. See you next time.